tween animation for the gorilla that slams down on the ground as our little monkey character runs away. So it's a bit different to our walk cycle tween animation that we created, in that this is sort of a singular, unrepeating event. We have him entering and then we're going to have him leaving. And they're two sort of little sections that we'll be creating in this tutorial. But to begin with, we want to create the parts for our gorilla. So I'm going to do this on a couple of new layers and hide all my other layers, pasting in my gorilla template that I have here, and I'm going to bring down the opacity just so I can draw on top without many issues. So I'm going to lock my gorilla reference, and I'm going to call this layer gorilla ref. And on the layers above, I'm going to create the pieces for this gorilla. So I'm going to zoom in to about 200%, and I'm going to draw the face first and foremost, following the sketch that I've set up here, just using the brush in Adobe Flash. Now, you will notice that the brush has a bit of an auto smooth setting. This is sometimes useful and sometimes irritating, but you do get used to it, and I've been using Flash for years now, and so I'm quite comfortable with it. But one of the questions I get quite often is how do you get your lines in Flash to look so smooth? And the answer to that really is practice. And also, don't fall prey to the illusion that you can just draw and whatever lines you create are the quality of lines you'll always end up with. I undo and redo my lines quite a lot. I'm going to draw some details in the face here. Because I'm not frame by frame animating this character, I can add some little tweaks of detail, like some lines on the mouth, without worrying about how much I'm going to have to redraw those details. So that's one of the little perks of tween animation, and I can add a few more details here and there just to make it sort of look a bit gritty and scary looking. I'm going to use some of those thin lines on the eyebrows, and they're just to sort of communicate dry, leathery, cracked skin, just to add a hint of texture in there. And then I'm going to draw in the hair and then continue to follow the outline. But as you can see, the head and neck sort of wrap up about here, and this is all I'm going to draw of the head section. I'm going to turn this head frame into a symbol. I'm going to call it gorilla head. And inside this symbol, I'm going to color it with white eyes, and I might add a touch of red around the eyes just to show a little bit of rage when he lands and stares at the monkey, which will also add a little bit of intensity too, and some surprise for the viewers. And now we're going to find our gorilla color scheme, and I'm just going to go with very dark desaturated browns for the fur, almost black, and color that in here. And I like to colour by segmenting off the areas of shadow and then painting them in. And then I can find a highlight colour and paint that into, and that's how I get my two-tone in Flash. So I'm going to do the same with the skin area, but it's going to be a bit lighter, still a desaturated brown, sort of like a muddy dirt sort of brown. I'm going to section off the inside of the eyes because I'm going to have those a touch darker, but I am going to fill in the rest of these areas here, and then move on to the nose. I'll section off the nostril again so I can fill those in with a darker color, and then divide under the lip and the back of the jaw. Now I'm going to find a lighter tone for the highlights of the skin, like this. And then I'm going to select my darker tone and paint that in the nostrils and under the eyes. I'm going to actually segment off this interior area there too, and I'll paint that in. I'm fairly happy with that. I feel like maybe the eye section is a touch too dark, so I'll bring them up just a little bit, including the nostrils, and I'm pretty happy with that for the gorilla head. Now, you may wonder why I haven't drawn the eyes. I'm actually going to draw them on a layer above because I'm going to tween those separately because the eyes are going to follow the monkey. So first and foremost, I'm going to name this layer gorilla head. Wait, I got to spell it correctly. And then on the layer above, I'll call this layer gorilla eyes. And I'm going to draw very small pupils because these look like they're very intense and focused in on something, which is something you can do with eyes to create that intensity. I'm going to turn this into a symbol and I'll call it gorilla eyes. And I've finished with the eyes there, and you can see we've got a pretty intense, angry looking gorilla face. Now we're going to draw the body areas of the gorilla. And I'm going to divide this into the following areas. First, we have the torso, and then I'm going to draw the upper arm area, and I'm going to draw that once because I'm going to mirror that behind and at the back for the back arm. Then I'm going to draw the front arm, the back arm, and this leg. And this leg is all going to be in one piece because it's going to be tweened carefully, and we'll get to that in a bit. So now we're going to break it all apart. I'm going to wireframe and lock the head and pupil layers and add a whole bunch of layers underneath, and I'm going to subdivide these layers into the areas of the monkey that I'm going to be creating. So in the order that they will be positioned, the topmost under gorilla head will be gorilla front arm. Underneath that will be gorilla up arm, then gorilla torso, gorilla leg, and then finally 2 more layers with gorilla back arm, and then at the very, very back we have gorilla, if I can spell it correctly again, up arm. So now I'm going to start off by drawing the front hand. And I'm just going to trace in the areas that I've pre-prepared here. And it's all pretty straightforward. I'm just following a fur sort of texture and creating the silhouette of a very strong, brutish gorilla hand. And it's going to slam down on the ground in aggression. And when we get to the tween section of the tutorial, it'll be a lot of fun to create that intensity. Now we're drawing in the pinky, some lines of the hand, and now we're good to color. Now I need to make sure I have the right palette, so I'm just going to remove a bunch of the colors from my palette just to make some room there, and then I'm going to eyedrop the fur, so I have my 2 fur colors there. Then I'm going to eyedrop the skin tones, and that's basically all I'll need, because I won't need any extremely dark areas or the pink of the eyes or anything like that. So now locking and wireframing the head again and going back to the arm, I'm going to first draw in the fur area. I'm going to section off the areas of shadow, and we can add some texture here by sort of drawing in some lines that aren't exactly following the lines that we have in there for the fur, and that sort of adds a bit of interest. And now I can draw the front, paint that in, and now we have the hand. Doing the same thing as before, outlining the areas of shadow and then painting in the areas of highlights. So this is our gorilla front arm. Convert it to a symbol. The converting to a symbol equivalent is available on all the other animation software that you might be using, and this is what it's called in Adobe Flash, but there are similar things in Toon Boom and Anime Studio and all of that. So I'm going to call this symbol gorilla front arm. Move the pivot point to around the middle between the elbow and the bicep. And then up here at the gorilla head, I actually forgot to change the pivot point. I'm going to move that here so the gorilla's head can rotate and move around the pivot point that I set. I'll wireframe and lock that and do the same with the gorilla front arm. And now I'm going to move on to the gorilla's upper arm. Doing the outline in fur, adding fur to sort of show the outline of the tricep and the muscle structure of our gorilla. And then I'm going to finish the end of the arm. And the reason I'm drawing that outline is because the front arm is appearing in front of it. And so when I curve it around, it will sort of make it look like an elbow. And it fills in for that, which is quite a useful little trick to use. And now I'm just going to draw in a little bit of shadow in this area. And then fill in front, and I'm happy with that. Now I'm going to rotate it so it faces upright, convert it to a symbol and call it gorilla up arm, move the pivot point and rotate it back, and that way the bounding box is in a more reasonable position. And you can see now if I unwireframe my gorilla front arm, the transition between the two is pretty seamless. and it works quite well. So I'm going to lock and wireframe both of those and move on to the torso, starting to add some fur for the back and just drawing a general line behind here, which isn't really going to be seen, but this area will be, which is the torso. Draw in some gorilla nipples. That's always good fun. And drawing some outline for where the fur is going to kind of come towards the front here and come around, outlining the torso. Now the torso isn't going to be seen heavily. The chest is the most visible part, so other than that it sort of recedes and then goes off into nothing. So I can basically just close off this line here and close off the line for the torso and then draw in the shadow for the chest. So I'm going to draw the shadow just following this outline and then basically give a pretty broad shadow section, which is also mostly covered by the head and the upper arm, which you'll see in a moment. And now just draw some outlines for the shadows for the chest. The chest is going to be mostly covered in shadow, and I'll just fill in those highlights, and then I'm happy with that. So I'm going to convert this into a symbol. I'll call it gorilla torso. Change the pivot point to be down here around the waist, around the pelvis, wireframe and lock, and then we move on. We don't have too much left to do because I don't need to draw the upper arm for the other arm anymore, but I am going to draw this leg, and the leg is basically to show that there is some balance in the center of mass, but it's not going to do a huge amount of work when it comes to the actual animation, which you'll see later on. But I'm basically using this as a bit of a token just to make sure that we have something in there. Drawing in the feet. I want the lines to be reasonably balanced. And there we go. Okay, cool. So that's basically all I need to do. I know it looks a bit funny. I'm just going to do some outlines of the shadows here, and most of the lower part of the leg is going to be covered in shadow. I'll fill that in and fill in most of the foot with shadow as well. Then fill in the highlights and our leg is done. I'm going to convert this to a symbol, call it gorilla leg, and move the pivot point up to this corner. So now I can sort of rotate based around that pivot point. And finally, we have our gorilla back arm, which is this section here. Before I do this, I'm going to copy my up arm layer and move it down to here at the very bottom up arm layer, and I'm going to flip it horizontally and place it in the position of the upper arm at the rear of the gorilla. And now I can wireframe and lock that and draw my back arm in context with the gorilla's upper arm in place. I quite enjoy animating very large and powerful figures because you can get a lot of impact in the motion, and hopefully we'll be able to convey that quite strongly when we get to the tween animation, which is coming up very soon, which I'm excited about. So drawing the closed fist, it's going to slam directly down onto the ground, so I want flat knuckles, and I want to show these knuckles sort of bulging a bit, so he's got very powerful bony sort of hands. And now I'm ready to draw the outlines. So I'm going to start off with the fur. Once again, sort of alluding to a whole bunch of fur that I'm not necessarily adding in detail. And then filling in the lighter area, like so. And then, last but not least, we go through and add the shadows for our gorilla fist. And then paste in our highlight. So in context, let's see how that looks. I'm pretty happy with that. I might go into the gorilla's upper arm and just pull this shadow back a bit. I feel like it's taking up a bit too much space. So I'm going to just push it back like this and then refill that shadow area in. And now when I return, there's less of a clash between these areas. So I'm going to reposition the arms slightly. And I'm going to call it in a symbol, gorilla back arm. You guessed it. And move the pivot point up to the inner part of the elbow. Then I can unwireframe everything and see my final gorilla in context, and I'm pretty happy with that. I reckon he looks pretty cool. So I'm going to get rid of my gorilla reference, and I'm going to begin the animation. So first things first, I'm going to widen out my frames so I can see everything without having to scroll up and down, and I'm going to bring back the original section here. I'm going to wireframe and lock my gorilla reference layer that I have here originally, which is in position, and I'm going to click and drag and move my finished gorilla into place. So this is actually where he's going to land. That being said, I need to create a keyframe exactly where I want him to hit the ground there. Once I've done that, I can start on the animation. So I'm going to hide my gorilla reference now that I know he's in place, and in fact I can delete that altogether. And several frames before, I'm going to have him rearing back. So I'm going to start his animation here, and everything before that I can delete. So at the moment I'm setting up keyframes where I'm going to add the motion, and I'm going to change the motion later. So my first frame is at frame 10, then at frame 16 he slams down, and then he rests at frame 30. So I'm actually going to have a pretty slow unwind, but on frame 16 when he slams down there's going to be a significant amount of squash in his body, and his body's going to return to his upright position, which is going to look like this on frame 30. Then after that we're going to animate him sort of walking backwards out of the frame. But first let's give this section some motion. So on frame 10, when he's first animated, we're going to take everything and rotate him backwards like this. I'm going to take the head and the eyes and really pull them back like so. And I'm going to really drag these limbs back like this. It's going to look a bit odd, but that's okay because it's actually going to be mostly out of frame. And I'm going to really stretch the proportions of the gorilla so that when he actually comes into frame, it's going to make a lot of impact and actually make a lot of motion. But the actual movement itself is going to be over a very few frames. So we want to make sure that we get it looking exactly how we want to. So I'm going to get the elbows raised really high on this gorilla here. I know it might look odd at first when we're sort of really pulling everything apart, but in context, it's going to look quite cool. I'm going to raise the leg to be quite high, and that's the starting pose I think I'm going to try. And I'm just going to pull everything back just so it's just out of frame like this. We can have a little bit of bleed onto the frame, that's perfectly fine. I'm actually going to bring the frame forward slightly so there's even less time between when he enters the frame and slams down. And now I'm going to add a tween between frame 11 and frame 16. And we can see him slam down. Now obviously this doesn't have pretty much any impact at all at the moment, but what I need to do is on frame 15 duplicate the keyframes and reposition him, and I'm going to add a lot of stretch. So I'm going to pull him in like this, stretch the torso like this, and really straighten out those limbs and stretch them like so. And this is going to create a large amount of energy and really pull the motion quite extremely, but it's going to be seen so minimally that it won't look odd. I also need to flicker back and forth to make sure that the impact areas of where the knuckles are hitting match in the frame that we're stretching now and where he ends up resting. And I'm going to do the same with the other arm here, stretching the arms out but making sure that we hit the collision point, and we have to of course stretch the knee up and the leg up so it's in place. And now immediately after, on frame 16, I'm going to really do the opposite. I'm going to squash everything and pull it down. Everything's going to be really squishy because he's colliding with the ground. I'm going to skew the arm, squash the arm, make sure that the collision points are in the same area, but I can do that after I set up the initial squash, because this is what I really want to focus on and get right at the moment. Also going to squash that knee up and pull it behind the torso, and then I'm going to reposition my monkey, and flicking back and forth between these frames I can then see where I need to reposition body parts, and I'm feeling pretty good about that. And then I can add a tween between frame 16 and frame 30 to the final resting pose and see what this looks like in context. So we have a slam down. I feel pretty happy about that. One thing I'm not too happy about is the fact that his hands are going directly to the ground. I feel like he actually needs to have a bit of distance before the bounce. That way it's a bit more of a collision. So elbows raised up first. I'm also going to pull the leg back because obviously it's not fully drawn, so I have to sort of hide it and disguise that, like so. I actually might do so off to the side of the frame and stretch it out like this. And now you can see him coming into the frame and slam. We have the impact and then he comes up to his resting position. His body needs to get a bit lower and squash a bit more, and his head looks a little bit odd, so I'm just going to make sure it's positioned in the right place. And now we are going to do something that's going to make all the difference. We're going to ease in and ease out. That means that we're going to take this first section and make sure it starts off a bit slower and accelerates until on impact. And then after the impact, we're going to ease out, meaning it decelerates. It goes to its resting position, starting off with a faster movement and then much slower as we get towards the end. So I'll show you in this context because it makes the most sense. When I move from frame 16 to frame 30, you can see that we're simply moving from point A to point B without any acceleration or deceleration. So when I select these frames and ease out to 100, we slow that down. We have a bit of an ease out. It starts off faster and then it releases at a slower pace, and we end up with a much more organic looking standing pose. And then we're going to do the opposite for the lead in with 100% ease in, where we see him accelerating and slam. He then eases out. I need to reposition his foot slightly. It's sliding along the ground a little bit. I'm just going to glide along here and see how that looks. I can test it in context by rendering it in Flash, and I feel pretty happy about how that looks. So we have the monkey running across, bam, and the gorilla's landed, scarily looking at the monkey. I think that works quite well. Now what we can do is have the eyes move so that by the time he's in his resting position, he's looking up to the other side of the screen where the monkey has gone. And that makes a little bit more sense with the action that's happening. So the gorilla's sort of responding to the environment around him, even though there's not a huge amount of facial animation. We're at least having him watch the monkey. So there we go, bam, slam down. I'm pretty happy with that. I think the ease out could be even stronger though. So I'm going to drag these frames at the end from frame 30 to frame 40, and I'm going to select this area with the 100 ease out, and I'm going to add a custom ease. Most animation programs have this. I know Toon Boom does, and I'm sure Anime Studio does, and it's the ability to tweak and more specifically change the easing of the animation, and I've made the ease out a little more extreme so that the second half of the motion is very slow but the first half is quite rapid. And now that I've done that, I'm ready for the monkey to walk off. I'm going to give him a short pause on the screen so that for 10 frames he does nothing, and then from frame 50 to wherever we end up going, he's going to walk off. I'm going to do this by using keyframe poses. So I need to sort of roughly figure out how long it would be between each movement. I'm guessing about 20 frames. So at frame 70, I'm going to move everything back, but I'm going to keep the front arm anchored down. I'm going to move the torso and the head back and aim the eyes up a little bit more because he's going to continue to watch that monkey in the distance. The leg is going to go back and skew back as well because he's going to step away, and the front arm is going to bend at the elbow and skew, and we're going to animate it so he's actually lifting his arm and sort of walking backwards with his hands, which we'll get to in a moment. So we've done our first keyframe pose, and then our next one, 20 frames later at 90, will be with everything moving back except for that back arm. So I'll drag this all back. I'm going to rotate the upper arm at the back and just sort of slightly change that back hand, and then rotate the torso and head. Just kind of give things a bit more of an organic look. You don't want everything moving at the same rate. You want things to shift about in a bit more of an organic way. And now I'm going to move and rotate this hand backwards, like so. Okay, so we have 2 keyframe poses of this walking off section. And now I'm just going to tween between these keyframes. I mean, you can see that we've got the basic look there, and that's what we're going for. So now that we have our keyframes in, we're going to break down this motion with additional frames between them. So duplicate the keyframes in the very center of these tweens, and we're going to add some organic movement. So we're going to lift everything up, just dragging it up on both of these middle frames. And then in the middle frame between the first 2, we're going to lift the rear arm quite a bit and drag it up, bend the elbow dramatically here. And I'll do the same here in the middle frame between the end section, dragging the arm up and skewing, squishing it and lifting at the elbow. And this way, hopefully, we get more of an organic look because he's walking backwards. So he looks kind of cool there. We can add some secondary motion here with the head by having the torso and arms go up while the head doesn't really squish. We can stretch it back down and lower it in this middle frame. That's probably a little too unaffected, so I'll make sure it follows it somewhat. And we'll do the same in this section, so lift everything up except for the head, and then drag the head up, squish it a bit, and see how that looks. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. The last thing I want to do is add some easing. So like we have with our slam in, we can ease in and out with the hands so that they don't look so mechanical when he walks off. So I'm going to try easing in and easing out, one after the other, and we'll see how that looks. We're just going to try it in context. So I'll play it now. See, that actually looks pretty cool. We get a much more organic look, like his sort of cautiously walking backwards. And now that we've got that to a place that we're happy with it, I do want to make sure that the head sort of rotates a little more organically, and I'll have the eyes lower so the eyes follow the monkey. And then we have one last section of animation to do, which we can actually do without anything else. We can remove all of the other parts of the gorilla and then just animate the last hand transition, which will be over another 20 frames or so. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to bend the elbow at the back, move the hand back, and sort of change his pose as if we did that, you know, in the entire walk cycle, but instead it's just with one hand. Adding a tween, and then in the frames in the middle here, raise it up, bend it at the elbow so he's lifting his hand, and then we can ease in the first section and ease out in the second section, and then we get that final lift off the screen. And I'm just going to extend that last section just so it's a bit of a slower exit, so it looks like he's slowing down as he walks away. So that, ladies and gentlemen, should be our gorilla done. So I'm going to render it now. We can see him slam into place and slowly walking away. And I'm quite happy with how that looks. We get to see how it looks with quite a bit of energy in the slam down, and then with a bit of a cautious walk away using some of these tween animation techniques. And I'm happy with the result. I hope you enjoyed this video, and be sure to check out the other chapters where we go into some frame by frame animation, hybrid animation, and more. See you later.